Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back, and fantastic to see so many of you back in your seats on time, which tells me that you're eagerly awaiting our next speaker, and with good reason. It's my delight to welcome Ambassador Shingo Yamagami to the National Press Club, which is his second home in Canberra. For those of you who saw his speech earlier this year, it was a tour de force. He's been an excellent presence on the diplomatic scene in Canberra and at the right time. I hadn't realised, but when you look at his biography, he's had pretty much every posting a diplomat would want to have. He's been in all of the key positions in the Japanese Foreign Ministry. He's worked in the US, in London, in Geneva, in Hong Kong, and now in Canberra. And importantly, he's had two roles which give him a strategic appreciation of our strategic environment, which very few people have. He had 2 years as the Director General of Japan's foreign policy think tank, the Japan Institute of International Affairs. And importantly, he also ran the Ministry of Foreign Affairs intelligence function as well. So he comes to his role in Australia at a time of great change, but equipped to deliver his insight on that, and he's done so famously since he arrived in Canberra. We're very pleased to have him here today. Japan is a key international space partner for Australia. We've heard through the conference so far the importance of the data that Japan provides to us from their weather satellites, and we've had a lot of recent activity with the Japanese Space Agency as well. Without wanting to steal too many of the points from his speech, would you please join me in welcoming His Excellency the Ambassador to the stage?
Well, good afternoon. James, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for that kind introduction. And I'd like to thank the Australian Space Agency and its head, Mr. Enrico Palermo, as well as the Space Industry Association of Australia for hosting this symposium. I am grateful for the opportunity to speak with you today concerning Japan's space program and the prospect for further cooperation in this field with Australia. Australia has a long involvement in space exploration and discovery. How do I know this? I watched the dish. It introduced me to the Parkes telescope and the idea of dish cricket. But don't worry, there will be no comparisons with basketballs in this speech. On that note, allow me to turn to our subject for today, space and its boundless potential. It is evident to anyone with even a passing interest in space that the role played by space systems in security and economy is rapidly expanding. To paraphrase a well-known phrase from Star Trek, space is another frontier. For the development of scientific technology, and is a driving force for economic growth. Technology developed for space can be put to use across a great many areas, providing vital infrastructure for government and industry alike. Hence, space and its use are steadily growing in importance. Japan-Australia Space Cooperation has already produced successful results. Many of you would be aware that in December last year, the Hayabusa 2 capsule made its spectacular return to Earth, where it was collected at the Umera test range in South Australia. Furthermore, during the 2019 to 2020 bushfires, data from Japan's Himawari satellite was used by Australian authorities to monitor the situation on the ground. This is the most symbolic representation of Japan-Australia Space Cooperation, but there are others. For example, JAXA used the Japanese laboratory Kibo, or HOPE, in the International Space Station, ISS, to arrange an experiment for school children. This involved seeing how the golden wildflower, the national flower of Australia, would fare in a zero-gravity environment. Both countries also collaborated in opening a robot in the Kibo laboratory as part of an international competition involving puzzle solving. In this session, I'd like to expand on the future of our cooperation in this cutting-edge field, but it's a seriously exciting time for our relationship. The security aspects of space usage grow ever more important, given the vital place that space plays in national security. Centered around the concept of C4ISR, the use of space for security purposes is deemed essential to ensure military supremacy for one's own country. Technological innovation taking place in militaries across the globe is accelerating these trends. Space has become an important domain for a variety of technical fields, be they AI, space computing, fiber optic, light wave communication, quantum cryptographic communication, and advanced sensors. However, unfortunately, there are also some practices that threaten the stable use of space. Information has come to light revealing that a number of countries have been developing their own forms of ASAT, anti-satellite weaponry, designed to directly attack and destroy the satellites of other countries. Other ASAT weaponry is being developed to disrupt satellite functions, so-called killer satellites, using lasers and signal jammers. Japan is concerned about recent irresponsible behavior surrounding a Russian ASAT test, which generated a large amount of space debris. This sort of test undermines a sustainable and stable use of outer space. Japan calls on Russia not to conduct this kind of test in the future. In May of this year, China's Long March 5 rocket broke apart, scattering widely over the Indian Ocean. Japan believes it is vital for space activities to ensure safety, transparency, and to be done responsibly. International rulemaking and norms are very important. Countries must work together to ensure stability, not only in the East China Sea and South China Sea, but also in space. So, what steps is Japan taking to make its space ambitions a reality? Firstly, Japan aims to become an independent space power. What this means is that Japan will strengthen the industrial, scientific, and technological foundation of its space activities and expand its use of space, thereby creating a virtuous cycle of strengthening the foundation of and expanding the use of space. This activity includes the establishment of space security, contributing to disaster response and solutions to global problems, creating new knowledge through space science and exploration, and using space to drive economic growth and innovation. Among all of these measures, our space security efforts to ensure stable use of space are the most urgent in light of the seriousness of the risks I mentioned earlier. In order to respond to threats emerging in space, there needs to be an all-of-government approach in Japan that transcends the agency of the Ministry of Defense and which combines the talents of government and industry to improve capabilities across a variety of areas. For example, space situational awareness, SSA, is vital to comprehend moves to hinder the operation of your own satellites or judge the risk from space debris. The Japan Self-Defense Forces aim to strengthen their capability in SSA given its importance. As such, they are moving forward on the creation of of an SSA framework, including the installation of radars in cooperation with partners such as JAXA and other relevant organizations, as well as the United States. Japan has also commenced developing satellites that will allow it to observe space from space itself. Meanwhile, the JASDF is working on enhancing itself as an organization in order to strengthen its capabilities in space. In 2019, the then Prime Minister Abe Shinzo announced a policy of emphasizing space as part of Japan's defense strategy. He told SDF officers that in the future, the JASDF would become a combined air and space self-defense force. This is already producing results. The Air Self-Defense Force established a new Space Operations Squadron in May 2020, and recently the formation of a second Space Operations Squadron was announced to be established by fiscal year 2022. Japan also continues to launch intelligence gathering satellites, communication satellites, and positioning satellites. As these examples demonstrate, Japan is very actively contributing to the creation of a stable space environment. As space exploration and the commercialization of space-based enterprises continues, Japan will increase its involvement in this field to help protect the peaceful use of outer space and security. On the other hand, there is a limit to what one country can achieve alone. I mentioned earlier, international rule-making is essential for the stable use of space, and this requires the cooperation of like-minded partners. At the Quad leaders meeting held in September, we agreed to consult on rules, norms, guidelines, and principles for ensuring the sustainable use of outer space. We need to further promote such cooperation. In addition, just getting to space is an expensive business. This is another reason why cooperation with partners and allies is so important. Back in 1961, the year I was born, galaxy ago, the Apollo program was announced by President John F. Kennedy. It was a dawn of a new age. I still vividly remember the ambition that this program inspired in members of my generation. So I am pleased to see the recent revival of the lunar exploration program known as Artemis, launched by the United States and in which Japan and Australia both participants. In fact, the moon has a special meaning for the Japanese people. The oldest Japanese literary tale, The Tale of the Bamboo Cutter, was written in the late 9th or early 10th century, with the moon as its central theme. We also say, the moon is beautiful in Japanese as another way to say, I love you. I cannot wait to see a future in which Japan and Australia jointly fly to the moon and play among the stars, as Frank Sinatra famously sang. The Japanese-Australian relationship is a special strategic partnership. So it is quite natural for strategic partners to cooperate in the field of space. For Japan, there are other geographical reasons for wanting to pursue further cooperation with Australia in space. Australia's position in the Southern Hemisphere has a lot of merit. For example, during the launch of Epsilon rocket number 5 earlier this month, JAXA was able to monitor the flight of the rocket using the SSC Australia Space Tracking Station located at Mingenew in Western Australia. Another latent advantage is the fact that Japan and Australia lie on almost the same longitude, which means that satellite information can be shared in real time, which greatly assists the success of missions. For example, Japan has a system of positioning satellites known as the quasi-Zenith satellite, Michibiki, which complements the US GPS system. GPS is an incredibly useful system used by car navigation system and the like, but it is not always that reliable in areas with many high obstacles like mountains and skyscrapers. Michibiki can be used in conjunction with GPS and has a merit as both a stable and high-quality positioning system. The positioning accuracy of smartphones in Japan is incredibly high. The government of Japan plans to expand the current Michibiki system of 4 units to 7 units in 2023. In Australia, given its close longitude to Japan, it will also be possible to make use of this service. In March this year, Hitachi Solutions made use of the Michibiki positioning technology for the preliminary groundwork on the Western Sydney International Airport in New South Wales. By using their smartphone to conduct assurance tests measuring the volume of soil, they proved the efficacy of this system. This technology can not only be used in car navigation, but can also be used for improvements in the productivity of construction sites and safety of automated driving technology. I expect that it will be put to use in Australia as well. What all this illustrates is the cooperation currently underway between Japan and Australia in science and technology to develop the talents of the next generation of scientists and engineers. This is just one part of a much larger story, one that is in the process of being written. Japan is a tremendous partner for space exploration, for our rocket launches are very reliable. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries' H-2A rocket has been successfully launched 41 out of 42 times. Close but no banana. Its successor, the H-2B rocket, has succeeded in all 9 of its launches. In addition, IHI's Epsilon rocket has also succeeded in all 5 of its launches. The Japan-Australia Defense Technology Sharing Agreement already provides a framework for greater cooperation between us, and expectations are growing for further progress in this area. For example, the Epsilon launch vehicle number 5 that I mentioned earlier had a Vietnamese satellite on board. Using Japanese technology, that satellite is now in space orbit. What this shows is that cooperation between Japan and Australia could begin with an Australian satellite being carried into space by a Japanese rocket. Furthermore, one of my dreams is to see a rocket launched from Australia using Japanese technology. That dream could easily become a reality with an Australian company launching a rocket from Australian soil using Japanese technology. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the situation before us. While technical and legal challenges remain, these can be overcome through cooperation both in space and here on Earth. I am often quoted as saying that the sky is the limit when it comes to the Japan-Australia relationship. But let me expand on that by saying, let's shoot for the moon. Without doubt, the development of cooperation between Japan and Australia and the Japanese, Australian, and American governments and industry in space has been and continues to be incredibly important. Japan will push ahead to actively promote this cooperation and to do everything it can to realize our shared ambitions. If we plan it well, it will eclipse everything before it. And it will give me more opportunities to clover equally fantastic puns into my speeches in the future. Thank you very much for listening.
Your Excellency, not nearly enough puns, I don't think. We are in the space industry, so we are in the business of making dreams a reality, and I know that there are 2 launch companies in the room who will be very interested to talk to you after this about the possibility of using Japanese technology from Australian launch sites. You've kindly agreed to stay on for some questions. Yes. My first question to you is, you talked about Japan being an independent space power. We've been talking a lot at this conference and through the year about Australia's space sovereignty. I'd be grateful if you could say a little more about how Japan thinks about the need to have sovereign capability in space.
Well, thank you. Well, Japan's goal of becoming an independent space power is based on its 2020 basic space policy. Space is a new frontier, or should I say domain, for scientific technology and for economic growth. Yes, threats are emerging in space, not including Martians, as nations and their private industries continue make greater use of space. This use of space and technology in it is becoming a game changer. Japan has to protect its national interest, and so it does so by employing its technological advantage in space. So the key word is technological advantage. By doing this, we can remain an independent space power. But when I say independent, we are still going to need to maintain and strengthen ties with allies and partners such as the United States and Australia. That is a clear prerequisite, if you will. So independent but together might be another way of putting it.
On that theme, I mean, you talked about Japan's investment in space domain awareness and space situational awareness. Is there a possibility for Australia and Japan to cooperate more in that area?
Oh, there most certainly is. As I said in my speech today, because Japan is in the northern hemisphere and Australia is in the southern hemisphere, we observe different parts of space. Complementarity is working. But we also complement each other as we are on the same longitude, and this is really promising. I am aware that Australia is keen to start personal exchanges with Japan in this field. Japan's policy is to strengthen international cooperation in SSA. So I expect that the specific cooperation framework will be made between the Japanese and Australian space agencies. So it will be a case of watch this space. Too much pun. I stop here. Yes.
I'm afraid to ask the next question.
Sorry.
We've seen a lot of discussion around the Quadrilateral this year and moving very quickly. You talked about the Quadrilateral leaders meeting in September. We saw a fantastic discussion just this month between the space chiefs of the Quadrilateral countries as part of the Sydney Dialogue. What should we be doing together within the Quadrilateral framework when it comes to space?
Excellent question. The Quad has come a long way, in my views, and there is so much more we can do together. It's often said that Quad is a vehicle to promote FOIP, free and open Indo-Pacific, but there is no reason for it to be completely earthbound. It can also apply to space. As discussed at the Quad leaders meeting in September, the Quad won't just cooperate on rulemaking, but will also share satellite data for peaceful purposes. This includes things like monitoring climate change, disaster responses and preparedness, the sustainable use of oceans and marine resources, and responding to challenges in our shared domain. So given all this, we clearly have room for many more discussions on what the Quad can do. We are also going to need to keep building cooperation on a bilateral and trilateral basis whether it be between Japan and the US, Japan and Australia, or Japan and India, or Japan, Australia, and the United States. So there will be lots of activity, and that in turn will increase the scale of cooperation between the Quad. That is my view.
My last question to you, Your Excellency. You've got 200 representatives of the Australian space industry in the room, as well as government agencies, people working in universities on exciting technology. From Japan's perspective, what would you like to see from the Australian space industry and in Australia's space policy in the next few years?
Australia, like Japan, has a goal of strengthening its space policy and industries, as I understand, including tripling the size of its space industry and increasing its space workforce by another 20,000 staff. So there is a major amount of latent potential for us to work together. What we need to do next is to develop specific projects. We can use bilateral dialogues to create frameworks for cooperation on multilateral exercise, such as that between the SDF and ADF on SSA, as I mentioned earlier. The governments of both countries can also lend their support to projects. For example, Tokyo last week, 25th November, was the venue for the Japan-Australia Cyberspace Symposium, which was hosted by the Australian government. There were many participants online from the Australian government and the industry, and I heard that it was a great success. Next year, DSEI, i.e. Defense Security Exhibition International Japan, will take place in Japan. And we put out requests for industry participants from many countries, including Australia. By using symposiums such as this, I think we can match businesses together and create specific cooperation between Australia and Japan.
Ambassador, you've been very kind with your time, very forthcoming in your remarks, and I think there are a lot of hooks in that speech for both government agencies and private companies to think about furthering cooperation. One of the most exciting ones, I think you mentioned, is the Wattle Seeds project, yes, which is being run by one of our members, One Giant Leap Foundation. And I think you'll have a little bit more in terms of cooperation on Wattle Seeds in the forthcoming months. So I'm excited to see that. Thank you for, I think, what we can all agree was a completely stellar speech. And we look forward to hearing from you again. You're welcome back anytime. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking the ambassador.
Thank you very much for having me.